I'm Mario Martinez Jr., CEO and founder of Vengreso, and we are the creators of FlyMessage.io, the free personal writing assistant and text expander application. On each episode of this podcast, you will hear from sales leaders, practitioners, and influencers to help you grow your sales numbers at scale. So, get your pen and paper or iPad and keyboard and start taking notes as you're now listening to the Modern Selling Podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this episode of the Modern Selling Podcast. And today, I bring you a brand new topic that I've never spoken about on the show here in 280 plus episodes. We're going to be talking about how sales can help drive business outcomes by working with product marketing, and product development. And I can't be more excited to have my friend, Mr. Tim Condon. He is the CRO at Clutch. Hey, Tim, welcome to the show, my man.
Hey, thanks. Wow, I bet 280 episodes, that's pretty cool that this is the first time. That probably doesn't happen very often, huh?
No, that doesn't happen very often where we are talking about something for the first time. You're right. And it's actually a really great topic. And when we were talking about in the pregame show, I was like, this is actually something that we've never spoken about really how can sales teams work with product development to drive better business outcomes, better product, so that it can actually increase revenue. And I'm really excited about that, man.
Yeah, no, me too. This is a great topic.
So do me a favor so everybody gets to know you. Obviously, I said you're the CRO at Clutch. Talk a little bit about yourself, your background, and who Clutch is.
Yep, cool. So, all right, so yeah, I joined Clutch about 2 years ago as CRO. Previous to that, I'd been in the same role at a company called HomeSnap. HomeSnap, it got acquired by a big company called CoStar. I'd spent like maybe 12 years at HomeSnap. I'd started as the first business side person, and grew into the CRO role. I mean, it was a fun. I mean, well, we'll spend a different podcast talking about that one, but it was a fun growth path from essentially we had nobody. I was the CRM administrator to running a team, both sales and marketing, and getting acquired. Prior to that, I spent 12 years at the Washington Post company doing a bunch of different sales and marketing roles. Really, really great, sort of proving ground where I could sort of learn a lot of different parts of the business, and frankly, probably why the topic today is one of the things I love to talk about. Clutch it's a B2B services marketplace. So if you're looking for marketing agency, an IT service provider, outsource company, we're a rating and review marketplace that with over 350,000 companies on it. And so we're across 157 countries, lots and lots of content for people looking for those types of service companies.
Man, that's phenomenal. Great. So, I actually was surprised at the plethora of resources that were available from Clutch. And it's an interesting story. And we've talked about some of these things that you guys have been able to do there, and how you are now really building a corporate infrastructure to be able to drive sales. So very excited about this. And you've also obviously have some opportunity here to talk about what you've done with product as well. And we're going to spend some time on that. But before we get into that, I got a very special question for you. And bro, I'm looking for something juicy. So give me something here. I ask all my guests this question. They don't know that I'm going to ask this question. And that is, tell us something nobody knows about you, even if they're looking at any or all of your social profiles.
Ooh, that's a tough one. I don't know if it's going to be as juicy as you want, but I am a hardcore Stephen King fan. Like I not only have read The Stand, which is it's like 1,300 pages. I actually then later on in life, literally listened to the 44-hour audiobook of The Stand. I can't get enough. I've read everything of his multiple times. I love the horror. I love the detail. It's a weird little passion of mine.
So if Mr. Stephen King is listening in to the show here, I don't even know if the guy's still alive. Is he alive? Do we know?
Yeah, he's still alive. Yeah, he's still writing books. Yeah,
he's still writing books. Well, there you go. So if you're listening in, Send my boy Tim a signed autographed book. I mean, the guy is a dedicated, loyal fan of yours. Would you?
If he's listening, I am the constant reader, as he likes to say.
I love it. I love it. Well, let's get into some meat and potatoes here, right? We talked about one of the biggest challenges that sales organizations have is that what they're selling is not what the buyers are asking for, or the buyers want X and they've got Y. And it's really frustrating for sales organizations to be trying to sell X when the buyers keep asking for Y. And you go back into the organization, they're like, yeah, well, we're not going to be able to design that, develop that. That's not of interest. We don't think that that's important. And you're like, but come on, it's going to drive revenue. I can bring this deal to the table if. So you've spent a lot of time in your career working with different product management teams within an organization that can help create sales success. So talk a little bit about the different kinds of product leaders that you've worked with. And you had brought an interesting perspective to this that I never really thought about.
Yeah. So, well, first of all, I've worked in both marketplace type businesses and then more software type products as well, right? And they're two very different, right? So marketplace businesses, because you've got sort of two people, you've got the buyer and the seller, and you're in the middle, right? You do tend to get some of those product leaders that are sort of like, revenue's the enemy, right? We are just out for the whatever side of the marketplace, the buyer side, right? And you've got to figure out how to sell to the sell side. And I'm trying to create a pure marketplace, right? And so you get some of those, and the Washington Post, a media organization always takes that to the extreme, right? Because it's sort of like our content is our content, and it can't be influenced one way or the other. And so you get that sort of like, don't even talk to me type of product leader, right? And then I've had the fortune of working with a product leader that's like, revenue is everything, right? And like literally, having a product leader that, and if he's listening to this, he'll laugh. There were times where I was like, dude, we need to that's you're pushing too hard, right? Like we actually need to think about the other side, the buyer on this one, right? Like, and then I'm really fortunate that the product leader I have now is a great balance between the two, right? She and I have a good relationship where we both are thinking about both the buy side and the sell side, because ultimately you need both to work to have an effective marketplace. But yeah, no, those are sort of the three types that I've encountered, and maybe there's others, but that sort of seems to run the spectrum.
All right, so you've got the revenue is the enemy. Back. That's what you said. Revenue is all that matters. And then I think I'm kind of interpreting the balance between the two, right? And let's face it, I have sat in many, many product discussions with product leaders, and you're talking about, hey, this doesn't work. This is not what they're looking for. This is not what we want. We hear this, we hear that. And you see some of the product leaders, and they're like, well, that's not what our data shows. That's not what we're going to build. That's too hard. And you're just like, I feel like sometimes you're just banging your head against the wall. And you're like, dude, do you not hear what the customers are saying? And one of the things I find so interesting is the ones that are like, hey, revenue is the enemy. This is not going to make a difference. If you ask them, when was the last time you sat on a sales call? When was the last time you went out and took a meeting? How often are you doing that? What I find is those product leaders who are performing well are sitting with the customer and understanding the customer's pain. And they're hearing the customer's questions, and they're designing and developing product that corresponds to that. So you obviously have had success stories working with your product counterparts, and obviously probably have shared some of the frustrations that I'm just describing as well. So can you talk about some of your success stories and working with the product counterparts and how you've alleviated some of these frustrations?
Yeah. So I have a great story. So I'll try to keep it somewhat concise. But back when I joined HomeSnap, the core. So the product was a Zillow type product, but the core of the product was there was a side of the tool that was for real estate agents. And we had hundreds of thousands of real estate agents on our platform. And so the idea was get them on the platform and then sell them something, right? And so that something, and this was back in 2015, that something was take their new listings and turn it into a Facebook ad and let them, click and put a credit card in and we run it for them, right? Not really a product that makes sense to do today, right? Because the platforms are so much further along. But back then, buying a Facebook ad was really, really complicated. And so our idea was we're gonna make it super simple. Well, the first version of that product was this really slick landing page. It was totally personalized to the agent and the house, right? So they'd actually see what the ad would look like, with that particular house and their face on the ad. And, they did a click and credit card and boom, it was done. But done meant all the data just dropped into our CRM, right? And my team had to actually literally go into Facebook ads marketplace and like build the ad ourselves. And but we knew like that was, we're a startup. We had like 20 people. Like that's, you sort of had to just start somewhere, right? So we did that. And I had one person on my team and her job was literally just create Facebook ads all day. And about once a month, she would come to me and she'd be like, I'm in over my head. And so she and I would sit down and we'd sit down with the product team and we'd say, okay, what are the steps in the process that if we automated would allow you to sort of like expand your scope, right? So like, what are the things that, like if we fix it once, it actually like opens up how many ads you can do, right? So like, I think for example, like one of the big ones was upload all the pictures to Facebook, right? If we could automate that process, suddenly like that took out a huge swath of work and she could do like 10 times as many ads, right? We did that side by side with the product team for literally 12 months and automated the whole process. And it was this amazing, step by step. We would sit down once a month, we'd go through her process and we'd look at it together and we'd say, okay, we could see something here, we can fix that, right? And sometimes it was temporary fix, but most of this was in service of like trying to get end-to-end automation. And it actually, in retrospect, you're looking like, wow, that sounds horrible, but we actually made a much better product because we had to do it manually at first, right? And because we got to make some mistakes or see like, oh, wow, when you do it this way, it doesn't work as well for the end client. So, here's how you have to build it. It ended up being an amazingly awesome process. I mean, if Tara's listening to this, she wouldn't probably say it was really amazingly awesome, right? But it was one of those processes where you're literally side by side with the product team, figuring out how to build it in a way that will not only automate the process, but automate in the way that's best for the client. So absolutely phenomenal experience working with the product team that was like really motivated to understand just how to make it work for us and for the client.
So I'm going to break down what I think I heard you say. And one of the most important elements there was, number one, you sat down and it was a 12-month-long process. Number two, it was a step-by-step. You guys would look at what are you doing? What's the workflow? And then can we apply technology to this particular workflow to increase the productivity, the benefits, the outcome, etc. But then what you did is you started tying productivity to outcome. If we did this, could this happen? And looking at it from those three things that I just mentioned is really, honestly, when we think about a new product, case in point, we have FlyMessage right now, and some of our customers have been asking for us to implement variable technology. I'll describe this to you. Variable technology is kind of like first name token in an email marketing system, right? Hey, first name. And so they want to be able to create their Fly messages and put in a token that says, hey, first name, and then somewhere in the paragraph it says first name again. So wherever they deploy it at, even though we're not integrated into a CRM, wherever they deploy at, a little pop-up that comes up that says, what's the person's first name? I write Tim. And then as soon as FlyMessage sees as Tim, it puts Tim in all the different places that the first name is in. Great idea, right? That's great. But then we also have, at the same time, customers saying, I really need help with looking at how to connect with a target buyer. And I don't know how to look at this profile. You've taught me how to do it in the training program, but I need help and it's taking too long. So I look at these two areas right here and I say, all right, variables is going to take me a month to build. What I call FlyConnect is going to take me 2 weeks to build. FlyConnect is an area that really is automating a seller's process and reducing the amount of time they have to read, as opposed to a template. You may have first name at the beginning and first name at the end, or first name at the beginning, first name in the middle, where I can just double-click Tim, takes me 3-4 seconds. But reading a profile, that takes me like 10 minutes. What am I going to pull out there? What do I actually write to personalize this connection request? So which one has the biggest bang for my buck? So that's the way we're looking at this. And by the way, what we chose was FlyConnect. Let's build that first, so that in case everybody was wondering. But it goes back to the what you just talked about, was really looking at taking the time to sit down. We'll look at the process that the buyer in this case, or the user, was going through, figure out how you can apply technology, and then looking at the business outcome of that. Did I kind of summarize that correctly?
That's exactly right. I mean, it was probably the best product, revenue experience I've ever had, because it was not just what, like what you said, the first part, just how do we apply technology to a process. It was like, how do we also learn from the manual process to make sure that when we apply technology, it creates the better outcome based on what we've learned, right? And so that's sort of like, that's pretty unique. I've not had many experiences like that, where it's sort of like it sort of touched on all three, and that was mostly because it just ended up being such an extended process, which it's probably a little bit atypical.
Well, I think this is an important element as we think about how does sales influence product development. Many times sellers will say, "Oh, my customer wants this." Your seller, Tim, my customers say that they need this. But the question that a sales leader should be asking, instead of saying, "Hey, let's go talk to product and build that," or a sales manager, the question I think we should be asking is what's the business outcome that will happen if we build this? Do you have a live deal on the table? Fine. Go sell that deal. Tell them we'll build it for that extra $150,000 a year, right?
No, exactly. Yeah, and really good product leaders. I mean, I'll tell you that the product leader at HomeSnap, he would always hold. He was the, revenues king, right? He would always hold. He would say, "Okay, we're going to do this in beta, but you guys are still going to have to sell it." Right? He's like, "There's no freebies. You got to. Part of this is proving that we can sell it, right?" And it's a good exercise to go through, right? To as you're building something, even if you're saying, "Hey, this is not quite ready yet," a lot of times it's tempting to say, "Hey, let's bring you on as a beta customer. It won't cost you anything," right? But if you do that, you don't exactly understand the value, right? Because they're getting it for free, right? So and they probably are going to be a little less engaged. And so he used to hold. He had a mantra which I loved, which is, if we're gonna, even in beta, we're gonna sell it. We need to understand what is the value, and if they're paying for it, they're going to be more engaged, and we're going to learn a lot more.
So, keeping on that same line of thought about really understanding the business outcome and the impact of business process and outcome, I think there's something important that needs to be said here, and that's the importance of sellers and sales leaders understanding product workflows, meaning what is a buyer going to do? Example, and then I want to ask your question. We just launched on Monday of this week our enterprise administration portal. It was literally pushed into production at 5 a.m. in the morning on Monday, August 5th. We had a meeting with one of our enterprise customers scheduled for noon that day. And as we're going through it, we're saying, okay, click here, do this, do that. And then I would ask a question. And I said, is this the process that you would expect to go through? And she would say yes or no. And one of them, she said yes. And then I said, okay, I just want to ask you one more question. And that is, presume this. And then she said, I I didn't think about that use case, then this workflow is not the right workflow. You need to do da 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 da, and that was my cue to say, see, product, I told you. But and my product manager was on there, by the way. If you're listening in, I love you, Santi. But that having been said, he was listening in, and I was like, I wanted to ask, because as an enterprise leader who's worked with enterprise apps and managed all these things for my sales teams, I felt like that doesn't make sense to me the way that it was built, and so they heard it right straight from the customer. So I guess for you, what have been some of the keys to success working with your product counterparts?
Yeah. So the first thing is that I learned this lesson and it hit home is as revenue leaders, we're just so conditioned to think like the dollars are what matters, right? But what I found is with a product team, their currency is often, does my stuff get used, right? Whether it's internal or external, if you are going and asking for stuff and then it doesn't get used, like that'll kill you, right? So the currency for a product team is very often like, if I build it, I want to make sure it's getting used, right? And I remember I had this one instance where our product leader, sort of built this like sales tool, and the problem was I hadn't asked for it. I didn't actually think it was going to work, right? And then he got mad at me because he was like, if we're going to build something, you need to use it. And I was like, well, that's fine, but like, then build the stuff that I asked for, right? That was when the light bulb went on. I was like, oh, the currency here is they want to know it's getting used, right? And if you don't respect that, if you sort of just like ask for the world and then sort of like throw it in the garbage, if or just sort of ignore it, like that is actually where I found a lot of sales leaders go wrong, is they just ask for stuff and don't really think about the fact that like, but I might not use it, right? So that's the big one. I think the second one is you get a lot of respect if you really try to understand what's happening behind the scenes. Like, how does the product work, right? So I'll give a good example. So we, on Clutch, we have lots of different directories, and a lot of them are geographic in nature. So if you're looking for New York City mobile app developers, right, that's a separate directory. We've got lots and lots of pages around cities, and so what I realized was we had a lot of small traffic pages that were geographically based that we weren't getting a lot of clients to buy into because it was too small, right? And so what I want to do is figure out how do I bundle them together into a sellable product. And I'd been working closely with the product team, and so one of the things I understood was geographic radiuses were how the back end worked for Clutch, right? So it wasn't zip codes, it wasn't state lines, it was literally like radiuses, right? And so there was a big debate. It's like, do we create like a Northeast, mobile app development, or do we create, a radius around New York City? And so I worked the product, and I said, and I said, hey, let's build this as a radius. And the funny thing was, our CEO at the time was like, well, I think it makes more sense to do it this way. And she and I were sort of like, well, look, we could do it that way, but it's going to take 6 months. If we do it this way, we'll get it done in a month. And from a sales standpoint, I didn't feel like it was going to make a big difference. It was funny because usually it's sort of like the CEO's in between sort of like the two fighting factions, right? This was the opposite. And so, you gain a lot of credibility if you strive to understand how it works under the covers, and then try to build your requests to accommodate, when possible. Like, sometimes it's not possible. Sometimes it's like, hey, you guys built this way and it's not going to work. But to the extent that you can say, hey, I understand how it works, and I understand that this way would be better, and the differences between this way and that way aren't big enough to make a difference, like, you just gain a lot of credibility, right? Because they understand that you're listening to what they've done and what's going to be easier for them. And then I always commit to a number when I'm asking to build, a product that we're going to sell. I just find, like, even though usage is a big currency, like, being able to say, I think this is worth X, right, and trying to get as close as possible, and then going out and hitting it is even better. You gain a lot of credibility, right? You'll get the next time you'll get the sort of the credibility to say, this one is a little bit of a risk, but let's try it, right? They're way more willing to do it if you had a couple successes before. So those are, I don't know, those are a couple of the tips that I found working with the product team.
Now, on the reverse, I guess I would ask you the opposite question, which is, how can, I guess, product leaders themselves be set up for success with their sales leaders? Because I think this happens a lot, where sometimes the product team is really building something in what seems to be a vacuum. You're like, wait, you spent how many months developing this? Why? Who asked for this? Right? Who thought of this? So talk a little bit about that. The reverse. How can others set themselves up for success with the sales leaders?
I love inviting my product teammates, one, to visit with clients, right? Nothing beats sitting in front of a client. And so if you're a product leader, or if you're a revenue leader, like, extend that invitation, right? Good product leaders will do that in certain ways, but like, there's always a value to doing that with your revenue teammate. And then, I like to let them see under the covers of how a sales organization works, right? And understand sort of our processes and understand where we're not working well, right? So there's a certain amount of vulnerability that if you open up, a product leader, actually can get them excited, right? And as a product leader, like, you got to be willing to sort of like, look, I don't think most product leaders like never aspired to be, in sales, right? That's usually not sort of a thing. And so it's probably not the most exciting thing for them to understand exactly how a sales organization works, but the reverse is true. You get a lot of credibility if you're willing to sit and understand how the process works. And so I try to make it so that, I understand how their process works and they understand how our process works. And then we're mostly talking the same language at that point.
Makes sense. Well, one of the things that I find is when we're like in demos and you're watching the customer's face, the idea behind a demonstration is to not show the things that are the ugly zits, right? You don't want to show those things, but inevitably there is always product complexity that is there in any one individual product. And you look at it and you're like, maybe it could be better if we did it this way, better if we did it this way. We want to talk about some examples that you may have about how reducing product complexity can drive additional revenue for the organization. So can you spend some time talking about that?
Yeah. So we have a great example here at Clutch. And actually, it's going to touch on a couple things. So, we had this one product, and it sort of got thrown together at, I don't know, about a year before I started. It got thrown together as a way to sort of hit numbers at the end of the year, right? I mean, everybody knows the drill. It's sort of like, oh man, we're so close, but man, we need something, and you know, if we get it with the, and so like. The revenue team with the product team and sort of slapped something together really quickly with the idea that like, oh yeah, we'll fix it later, right? Well, the sort of later had never come, right? And so this product was a very complicated product. It was really hard to buy. The incumbent, it was a limited inventory product. The incumbent advertiser had a right of first refusal. It was bid pricing, but there was just no guidance for the reps or the clients as to sort of what their bids should be or could be, or what gaps there was. And it was almost all run out of Google Docs. I mean, it was crazy, right? It was very, and so you just had a lot of reps who were sort of like, didn't like to sell it, because if you sell it and then the incumbent says, no, I've right of first refusal, I'll up my bid, right? Like then you're going back to the client who you just sold and saying, sorry, you didn't get it, right? That's never a good situation for reps. And despite all of that, it was about 8% of our revenue. So it was not a tiny part of our business, right? And so it took me probably 6 to 8 months in the job to even understand how the product worked. Right, like I just sort of like coming into the job, I'm sort of like figuring out, looking at personnel, this and that, and the core product, which is 90% of our revenue. Like, and finally, I'm like, I got around to like, can somebody explain how this thing works, right? Like, and I still don't understand it 6-9 months in. And so I learned about it, and I was like, and so I listened to, and then I heard from clients, and what was apparent was that the clients were getting a great deal, right? They loved it. As a matter of fact, it was sort of like the best kept secret on Clutch, because the people who figured it out, right, they had a moat because nobody else could figure out how to get in, so I sat down with the product team and said, I trying to understand, like, okay, like what parts of this are really hard to change, and then what parts are like going to be easy, right? And so we did. We streamlined the entire product. We said, one, no right of first refusal. Two, we gave very clear. We set pricing. Like, our model is a bit of an auction model, but we sort of said, like, okay, there are certain levels you're going to have to buy by these levels, right? The rep can have confidence going in and saying to a client, hey, if you buy in here, you're in, right? There's sort of no way, nobody else is stopping you from getting it. It was amazing. So our reps got more confidence on the product. Clients actually like understood how the product worked, right? So, and we did a whole bunch of training, right? Get everybody sort of jazzed up about the product. It jumped to about 20% of our revenue in about 3 months. I mean, it was just astounding how much of a difference it made, because there was all this value here, but it wasn't being tapped because it was so complicated to get in. And so, being able to sit and work with both the product team and, our clients, our reps, to understand how do we just make this a much simpler offering. And frankly, some of the complexity was originally designed to sort of maximize but because it was so complicated, you actually reduced the pricing because you just couldn't create an effective auction because you just didn't have enough participants. So anyway, what I found is really understanding at a level of detail how things work, and then saying, okay, now how to step back and make it super simple for the end users, in this case, both the reps and the clients, can really, really unlock value in your business.
So I'll tell you an early story, and I'll use FlyMessage because I don't mind. I think it's great to be able to share the wins and the successes, but at the same time, you got to be truthful and, share some of the challenges. So when we first built FlyMessage, we only built it because we were having our sales training program, and that's where we're doing deep, long, 2-year-long programs. And we saw that, reps needed to be able to take their prospecting messages and use them everywhere online. And so we were actually training reps how to use the software in the training. So we put it out on, the public internet on Chrome, and people were downloading it because we SEO optimized it so that it can be found. And we were just seeing tremendous amount of churn after someone was on the platform for just a few minutes. And just like for every 10 customers we got through the Chrome store, we lost 9. And it was just like, oh my God, like what's the problem? Like, I don't understand. Like, it's a freaking text expander. In its original phase, it was just a text expander. Like, how is this so hard? It's not that complicated. And it was interesting because early on for us, what we failed to recognize was that something like onboarding into a platform and a read me, walk me process, how critical it would be to the success of keeping a customer on the platform, or at least teaching them how to use the platform, right? So what was interesting is, as a non-technical founder of a company, working with the technology team, I started looking at all these different applications, some of them competitors, some of them not competitors. But looking at the workflow of what do they do? 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 And as I started going through this, I started noticing a consistent trend. One, everybody had onboarding. Two, some of them had the walk me features. And some of the onboardings were, super long. And some of the onboardings were you clicked on something and then an image popped up and then you had to watch a video, which is like, a 30-second to a 2-minute long video. And I started looking at all these different things and saying, oh my God, like this is horrible. That's horrible. This is horrible. That's great. And I started thinking about what I think I like this. So we built a version of onboarding. It was definitely better. Don't get me wrong. It helped, but it was too long. And so then we started doing more research, and then we started looking at, how long should it be? And, we heard everything from just 2 minutes to, you can have an onboarding as long as 10 minutes. And so we were like, well, geez, we have all these different components. How long should it take? Well, we ended up settling that the onboarding process takes about 5 minutes to be able to be up and running. And theoretically, that's not too big of an ask. On the flip side, we ended up realizing also as well that we were guessing a lot. And so that's when we, in our first round of micro investors that we got, which was our crowdfunding campaign, we got them on the platform. And then they had the same question: how do I use it? I don't know. So then we started getting them into a room and saying, well, what would you want to see? And what would you like to see? And what would it? And then we started learning from the customers. So at the end of the day, all that to be said is whether you think it's the right thing to build sales or you think product it's the right thing to build, doesn't matter unless one, the customer says it's the right thing, and two, if it actually drives revenue. And that's really the goal right there, is to focus in on driving product lines that will increase revenue production or fit to the bottom line. In this case, the example I gave earlier, FlyConnect versus variables, both of them are high demand requests. Both of them are, right? But one of them hits two levers, which is request and productivity, where one of them only hits one lever, right? Request doesn't really necessarily increase productivity. So anyways, all of that to be said, that there's some of the things we talked about here is really great in terms of, listening to your customers and learning at what's going to drive additional revenue. I think it's been a fabulous discussion. Any closing thoughts or comments you want to mention?
Yeah, actually I do. I thought a lot about this, and, sort of like put it in terms that, revenue leaders will understand and be able to apply. And, when you're working with your product leader, think about it no differently than selling a client right now. If my current product leader, Amanda's listening, like, the sales is not bad, right? Remember, when we sell people, we're trying to understand them, right? And understand their needs, right? And so, just build rapport, right? When I joined here, the first thing I did was, like, we went out to lunch and we just, we just talked about, like, her goals and how long she had been at Clutch. And then, build that into discovery, right? How does your product leader see the product 2 to 5 years from now, right? A good product leader is always thinking about that, but a good product leader is also always frustrated because they're not there yet, right? So understand, what is their pain? Like, what are they trying to accomplish, and what's holding them back, and what have they tried, right? Like all the sales tactics and questions that you use in a normal sales process, and then look for those short-term wins, right? Those, like, foot in the door wins, right? That gain you that credibility, and then find that common ground, because ultimately, you're all in this for the same goal, right? You want to build a big company, right? You want to build a big, successful company, and you're just taking two different views and lenses on how to get there. But if you sort of think about this as just one big giant sales call, right? Like, and build that sales relationship, and do it with, in the right ways, right? Where you're trying to help and build something together. That's how you be successful with a product leader, right? You get them so you're both rowing in the same direction, not against each other.
Amen to that. Well, hey, man, this has been a great conversation, really centered around growing both product development as well as looking at what the sales team needs and how to bridge those two worlds together. So, question for you: if someone wants to connect with you, or they want to reach out to you, they want to, talk with you, what's the best way? Is it email, LinkedIn, Twitter, or AKA X?
Yeah. So yeah, I'm on X at TP Condon. Certainly LinkedIn, right? Easy way to connect with me. those are probably the two platforms I use the most. I'm big on Instagram, but I don't really post much business stuff there. So, but LinkedIn I post a lot, and X I'll post periodically. So those are probably the best.
So if you're looking at my boy Tim, make sure you look for his last name as Condon, Condon. And make sure, please, make sure when you reach out to Tim and you are connecting on LinkedIn, don't just hit the connect button and go. Hit the personalized connection request button and say, Tim, I heard you on the Modern Selling podcast. Great job. Or even if you say bad job, at least tell him where you heard him from. But that having been said, this has been a great show. Tim, I got one last question for you, and that is your all-time favorite movie. What is it?
That's a pretty easy one. So the 300, right? The movie about the Greeks and the Persians. And what I love, I mean, it's a great movie, right? But what I just love that whole strategy about create this sort of pressure situation so that 300 men can compete against that. It's just the whole strategy behind it is just so cool, right? And just sort of how they did that. So anyway, yeah, definitely my favorite.
300 it is. I'm not sure if we've had that one, although I have obviously seen that. Was with Russell Crowe?
No, that was I don't know it wasn't sort of a big name actor in that one.
That wasn't. Well, maybe I'm thinking of the wrong movie. That's not the one with 300 men, right? Is it?
It is. But I don't think I don't think Russell Crowe is in that one.
Well, now you're gonna make me Sparta. Yeah.
Sparta. Yeah.
So okay, I'm thinking of the right movie. I'm thinking of that. Okay, well, who was in it? Now I got to figure out who was in the movie.
I forget the female character's a known one. I forget her name though. But no, there weren't. The lead male actor was not like a big name.
Oh, why did I think it was Russell Crowe? No, you're right. It's not Russell Crowe. I see his face, but I know his face is just I might have to look that one up and see who it is. Well, anyways, that having been said, you heard it on the show here. Go look at 300 for all of you interested in the movie right there that Tim loves. And for the rest of you, hey, don't turn that down quite yet. I've got this very important message for you right now. Thanks for listening to the Modern Selling Podcast. Please do me a huge favor and give the Modern Selling Podcast a 5-star rating and review on iTunes. Oh, and don't forget, if you'd like to save 20 hours or more in a month and increase your productivity, go right now and download FlyMessage, that's flymsg.io, for free. It's your free text expander and personal writing assistant. Hey, thanks for listening in, and until the next episode, good selling.